Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our conversation on improving college completion. This portion of the program is conducted as part of our Next America project, which is a special initiative we've had at the Atlantic and before that National Journal since 2011 to explore how growing diversity is changing really every aspect of American life, from education to the economy to politics to criminal justice. And this particular program is brought to you by our sponsors at the Next America Higher Education coverage, which is the Gates Foundation and the Lumina Foundation. And I want to start by thanking them. So let's plunge in. And because certainly this is, I think, one of the core questions facing the higher education system. When we look at access to higher education, there are some positive trends. Since 2002, high school graduation rates have increased significantly for African American and Hispanic students. And strikingly, the share of high school graduates who are Hispanic, African American, and Hispanic, white African American and Hispanic, who go directly on to college has now basically converged. Roughly the same share of whites, Hispanics, and African Americans go directly to college after finishing high school. But college completion rates still lag significantly for African American and Hispanic students compared to white students. So let's talk about that. What is the disconnect? What is the biggest reason for these persistent gaps in college completion despite the gains in high school graduation and college going? Michelle, maybe you could start us off.
Sure. I think there's certainly several reasons for that gap, or the gaps that you referenced, but I'll let my panelists talk about others. I'll just talk about one, which is really around information. There's lots of information out there, but it's not clear, it's not transparent, it's not easy to discern. And so one of the things that I think happens is that students end up in programs at institutions that are not best suited for them. And so as adults, we may be well-intentioned, but sometimes we track and sort students into programs and institutions that are not going to serve them well. And if we had better, clear, transparent data that could help, that would be one strategy. But certainly there are others.
Dr. Frederick?
You know, at Howard University, I would say the number one issue is finances. We have a private institution, but we have a 60% Pell Grant eligibility in our undergrad campus. And so when you look at a $23,000 tuition with a 60% Pell Grant, and 30% of our Pell Grant students have an EFC of zero, expected family contribution is zero, they get the maximum Pell Grant award at $5,800. It's a very, very wide gap. And so when we track our students, number one reason they don't finish is because of finances.
I think the example of Georgia State shows that a lot of the problems are institutionally based. It's the way we've set up the system. I think I'm on the panel because Georgia State has bucked the tide. We're a very diverse public university, 51,000 students. 60% of our students are on Pell, 63% non-white. Those numbers have basically doubled over the last decade, but our graduation rates have been going up, and we have no achievement gap. So our Black, Latino, low-income and first-generation students all graduate at rates at or above that of the student body overall. And what we've found is the biggest problem that underprepared and first-generation students have when they arrive on campus is we've created this incredibly complex bureaucracy that has all kinds of silent rules that only the insiders know about. And what we've really worked on at Georgia State systematically is trying to break down those kind of information barriers so that students are on equal footing when they get to campus.
We'll talk more about that in a minute. But we have on the stage with us an example of someone who actually has completed their college degree. We have a newly minted community college graduate as of last Saturday, so congratulations for that, Cecily. You know, we know when we look nationally at the figures that the completion rates in community college are even lower than they are in four-year schools. What were the keys that allowed you to finish, and what were the barriers that you saw among many of your classmates that did not allow them to finish? What were the biggest hurdles?
One of the keys that allowed me to finish was that the campus offer additional services. They have a career adult pathway success. I am a mother of 2 under 2, so they helped me get childcare. And I went to school at nights, and I went to schools on Saturday, and I took classes online. So it wasn't the traditional college setting. It was the non-traditional college setting for me, because I run a daycare throughout the day, and at night I go to school. I have 2 children. So that was one of the key success for me. I went on the campus, and and they offer additional resources that probably the regular universities wouldn't have, but the community college had. And then they offer grants that you had to put in hours of community service. So that allowed me to put in extra community service hours. It gave me money for education, and I don't have that amount of money on student loans. Most of my classmates, and I don't know if anybody noticed, I am Hispanic and I am Black. So I qualify under both minorities, and I'm a woman, so that's a triple minority. So I am one of those students that doesn't fit the exact pattern, or white or Black. I'm all of those three in one. Most of my students, the barrier was language. Language. NOVA provides more than 100 teachers that speak different languages. So they found a program that actually works to each individual student. So if you don't find that click of that person that can communicate and connect with you in the same language, you're going to be lost on the campus. So that was one of the key that most of my classmates did not find. I was able to kind of dabble into English a little bit, and then I knew Spanish. So if I didn't get assistance in English, I went to my first language, which was Spanish. So if you have a campus, you have to have a campus that have a variety of languages, and you have the staff to welcome those students.
A lot to follow up from this first answer. So let me turn to Tim, and maybe Dr. Frederick, you can also talk about some of the specific initiatives at your school. But let me, as you explain some of the things you are doing, I want to follow up on Cecily's point, which is when you look at the barriers to completion as you've studied them, how much of them are related to factors inside the classroom, academic factors, and how much of it is really related to factors outside of the classroom, balancing school and life, finances, those kinds of questions?
Yeah, well, we found that a larger proportion than most of our faculty and administration would suspect were self-created problems by the institution itself. It's hard to quantify, but I can give a couple of quick examples. We offer at Georgia State, big public research university, over 90 majors, and we were expecting students to come in and make informed choices about what they wanted to study and then pick classes that fit those majors and so forth. With that kind of complexity, the students who were left out and had disadvantages were the students who didn't have parents or brothers and sisters who had gone to college before who didn't know the system. So now we're admitting all students in what we call meta majors. They come in these large categories. They identify they're interested in STEM or business and health professions. And then we work the whole first year in getting them to be informed about the differences between the academic choices that face them. If they're interested in health professions, it may be nursing, but it may be radiology, it may be public health and so forth. But let's get the students to have an informed decision before they go off and begin taking additional classes, creating wasted credit hours, adding time to degree, and running out of funding before they reach the time of graduation. We didn't design the program specifically for the first-generation students, but once we introduced it, we found the graduation rates went up disproportionately for the low-income and for...
Let me come back to those structured pathways, that idea. But Dr. Frederick, talk a little bit about the initiatives at Howard aimed at improving completion.
We've taken a holistic approach, what I kind of call from cradle to graduation, not grave, but graduation. We really focus on educating the students, so we formed the Office of Undergraduate Studies that had a focus on making sure, for instance, something as simple as the students taking at least 15 credits, so we have a GUT 15 program, because what I found is that 40% of our freshmen were taking less than 30 credits, so by our system, they wouldn't qualify to be sophomores, even if they got a 4.0 that first year. And it was just simply, as stated before, the students needed to be educated. We've started on the financial side. We started a tuition rebate program in 2012. This year was the first year that we actually wrote checks back to students and their families. We give 50% back of all direct payments made in the last semester if students graduate on time or early. In this country, we talk a lot about student debt, but 40% of what students pay in the fifth and sixth year, we were paying for. So if you really push the incentive to graduate on time or early, even with giving a rebate, it's a huge incentive for us. And there's several other things like that. We increased the number of credits students could take a semester without charging extra to 21. Again, recognizing that not everyone has the academic aptitude to do that, but with 120 hours needed to graduate, if you can take 20 a semester, you graduate in 3 years instead of 4. And then some of the general education reform is the other thing that we've looked at, and we're trying to do more of that. We have a lot of students who do service. I'm really pushing for more experiential learning credit. We have kids who go to Kenya and build an irrigation system. I'm not sure there's a didactic class that they can learn more doing something.
Just to follow up, you are also trying to reduce the school's reliance on tuition as a source of income. Talk a little bit about that.
That's exactly right. We're trying to diversify our revenue stream. When you look at what tuition factors in, and you look at the average income of the Howard student, I think people have the impression that it's a, it's a different world for those of us who know what that show is about. They think that the students who come to Howard come from upper middle class or upper class black families. That's not the case. The average income of the Howard student family is $56,000. So what we have really tried to do is to look at other avenues. Real estate, we are a significant property owner in DC. So we've been moving to leverage those resources so that we can bring a revenue stream there. Philanthropy. There is certainly an arms war around fundraising in higher ed. There's no doubt about that. We have 2 institutions in higher ed who last year raised over $1 billion in 1 year. One of them raised 1.2, one raised 1.6, with the largest gift ever being given to a higher ed institution of $400 million at one of those institutions. My endowment is $600 million. You now have, I think there was a New York Times article that described one of these institutions as a hedge fund attached to a university. So fundraising.
Yeah. Michelle, you talked about whether students are mismatched sometimes with the institution. We know that the share of entering first-year students who are kids of color has increased enormously over the last 20 years, but the great research by Anthony Carnevale at the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce shows that most of those kids have been channeled into the 2- and 4-year public institutions that have the least resources and are often the least selected, but particularly have the least resources. How important a factor is that channeling in the disparities we still see in completion? Is the answer to improve the performance of those institutions in the kids they serve, or is it also to get more of the kids into the schools that are a part of the endowment arm race?
The answer is and.
And, both.
Both. So we definitely know that less selective publics and community colleges, for example, tend to be some of those institutions that are receiving large numbers of minority students. And those institutions are often serving the neediest students with the fewest resources. And that is certainly something that we need to put a lot of pressure on governments to do better by. And we really want to increase the share of students who move into the workforce. We want to help improve the economy. We want to contribute to social equity. Then we've got to put the resources behind where the greatest need is. And the greatest need is where those students are going. And we are doing the exact opposite. I would also say that we also need to make sure that as we take note of some of the structural improvements that are happening at campuses, like what we've just heard about from Georgia State and at Howard, we also need to recognize that there's some important things that we need to hold the faculty accountable for. We often don't talk about faculty when we talk about student success. We sort of assume them to be a part of the conversation, but I do think that we need to elevate the role of the faculty and their role in making sure the students are getting the academic skills and tools that they need to move on and move through graduation and into the workforce.
Tim talked a moment ago about somewhat imposing more structure and less choice for students as a way of kind of helping guide them through kind of the labyrinth of early years in higher ed. I was recently in Chicago with the community colleges there, where the completion rate had declined as low as 7%. 7%, which is almost an unfathomable number. They've now doubled it to 14%. Still, nothing to write home about, but clear progress. And one of the ways that one of the central strategies they pursued is basically a theory that less choice equals more success. They've tried to create more structured pathways for students that are somewhat closer to high school in a way, where you have a clear pathway toward a major and stackable credits and so forth. I'm just interested in your experience. When you started at Nova, what did it look like to you, kind of the smorgasbord on the menu there? How did you kind of find your way toward what you were, what you ultimately were going to choose? And is there a virtue you see? Do you see a virtue in kind of narrowing and focusing the choices for students?
When I first went to Nova, I had just came into this country. English is my second language. So when I first went to Nova, I actually dropped out within the first semester. Needless to say, this is my second time around, and I was more informed. So I believe that narrowing the choices would not be an option for me, because not everybody falls on the same pattern. So the more choices you have, the better it would be for the students, not only to figure out the way, but also to know exactly what you're looking for. If you put a child in a box and expect just to stay in that box, it's not going to happen.
What did you major in?
I am majoring in early childhood development for special needs children.
And when did you decide on that? Did you decide on that right at the very beginning or somewhere along the way?
I decided that right at the beginning.
And you stuck with it?
And I stuck with it. And that's the path I wanted to do.
Did you find with your classmates that they had many of them had equal kind of focus, or did they drift?
All of them had the same focus. Mostly everybody who's into early childhood development are either foreigners or people who actually love working with children. So they stayed in the path. Most of us are mothers, and most of us are foreigners. 90% of my classmates are foreigners and mothers with young children. So when we chose this path, we actually stayed with it.
One of the things you guys are known for are the predictive analytics on scheduling. Talk a little bit about how you try to guide.
Yeah, it's fantastic if students come in with that kind of focus. Most students do not. The average student who graduates from Georgia State several years ago was going through almost 2.5 majors before they got to the point of graduation, which is why we introduced some of these programs. One of which is, what we want to do is find out what's tripping students up early enough so that it makes a difference. So what we did is we went back in our historical data. We ran 2.5 million Georgia State grades, 140,000 student records, with the purpose of trying to find out historically what kind of decisions do students make academically that correlate to them flunking out or dropping out. We found about 800 things that were statistically significant. And now every night in our student information systems, we're looking for all 800 of those things for every student. In some cases, it's as simple as students registering for courses that don't apply to their degree program. They're in the wrong lab sequence that doesn't apply to their major and so forth. That's incredibly costly for students, that they end up taking time and effort taking courses and then get demoralized by being told later on, oh, you have to go back and redo it because you were in the wrong class. In other cases, it is predictive analytics, looking at early grades that students get in a major and what that says about problems that may exist when they're doing more demanding work. The point is not to control the choices of the students, but instead to give them the ability to succeed in what they've chosen. So, if they're a pre-med student and the early signs in an early math class are they're struggling, let's get them math help early on so they'll succeed in the courses they're paying for rather than waiting till they rack up D's and F's and then try to help.
Yeah, Howard obviously is an unusual institution. From Howard's founding in 1867, we had female students in the classroom. We had a medical faculty of 8 faculty members with 2 black surgeons. So in terms of what we have to be and what we have offered throughout the 149 years of our existence, we've come to recognize that choices are extremely important. And for minority students and underrepresented students, we really are filling a very extreme niche area. So I'll give you an example. Over the past decade, we sent more African American students from undergrad to STEM PhDs in this country than any other institution. As a matter of fact, we sent more than Stanford, MIT, and Harvard combined. So when you look at a Howard University and what we're trying to do, we really are trying to fill out a part of the spectrum where those choices are necessary. So, for instance, on the community college level, to kind of combine a little bit of what I've heard, we're looking at an associate's degree to PhD program where we would take students from the first year of their community college experience and bring them into our labs in the summer, have them go back to their community college the second year, but then when they come to Howard, rather than setting the bar at a Bachelor of Science, we want to set the bar to a PhD, because in a lot of experiences, although some of the graduation rates you quoted are low, the choices that students are making in terms of community college may not be because of academic aptitude. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think we just assume that.
Right.
And what I see in my student body, the students who transfer into Howard University, are students who really have used that as their kind of stress test. They've done well, and they really do extremely well when they come to us, because academics was not their concern. A lot of times it was money or other social circumstances that they needed to help. So we're trying to really push the students to a higher achievement level, because I do agree that where minority and underrepresented students have been filtered is a problem. There are less students of color, African-American males specifically, who applied to medical school this year than in 1976.
That is a staggering statistic that you shared. I want to talk about the community college transfer program in a moment, but Michelle, you had one more point you wanted to make? Or?
Yes, and it's related to community colleges and ensuring that while we give students options, because options really are important, that we offer them guided, structured pathways. And essentially that's what we're really trying to get at here. And one of those really important guided, structured pathways is that transfer pathway from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. And Dr. Frederick just spoke about what they're doing at Howard, but too often, many institutions between the 2-year and 4-year don't have that. Nova actually does,
Right.
but not enough. And therefore, we lose too many students in that transition point, and we are never able to recapture them, and too many of them happen to be minority students.
Richard Collenberg, who is talking later today, I believe, has noted that 80% of all students who start at a 2-year institution say in polling that they ultimately want to obtain a 4-year degree, but within 6 years, only 12%
That's right.
actually do. So let's talk about it. Virginia is one of the states that have tried to make it easier and more seamless to go from a 2-year to a 4-year school. You'll be starting George Mason in the fall. Talk about the process. What were there obstacles in terms of academic or finance, or was it a relatively smooth process for you?
I had obstacles financially and with math. Math has never been my cup of tea. But I did get, as I said, I did get financial assistance. I did apply for grants. I did apply for everything that was out there. I went and I Googled and I got assistance. And then Nova did help me with the transfer. They made sure that the credits that I were taking were the credits that I needed to transfer to George Mason. So I ended up not using all of the monies that I had for student loans, and I returned them back. So I am not going into a lot of debt when I'm going to George Mason.
And the credits are?
All of the credits transferred. I made sure to take the exact credits that I needed for my transfer. I had assistance from counselors that I met throughout midterms, through the middle of the sessions, and at the end of the sessions, it is called Career Adult Pathways at Nova. And they have the counselor that starts from you from the beginning till the end. And even when you transfer to George Mason, they assist you with filling out the application and making sure that you're going into the right program.
We're going to go to the audience for questions in a few minutes. But Tim, talk a little bit about what are the biggest barriers you face in integrating, adding students from 2-year schools? What are the biggest obstacles they face in making the jump?
Well, Georgia and Georgia State's actually the site of a very big experiment right now. We've just been consolidated by the state with the largest community college in Georgia, over 20,000 students. So one of our colleges now is a community college, still open access, still tuition at the level that it had traditionally offered and so forth. But the idea is exactly what we're talking about here. You know, if the challenge for transitioning students from 2-year to 4-year programs is all the gaps that exist between faculty and administrative expectations, what would happen if we make this part of a seamless university? So now we have one English faculty that's teaching students English composition on the 2-year campuses, and hopefully then allowing the students to transition to become English majors on the 4-year
And if you graduate from the 2-year, you're guaranteed a place in the...
Absolutely. In fact, you have the ability to transfer at 30 hours if you want to from the 2-year institution. So we are trying to deal with those issues, because the alternate, which happens far too often in higher education, is students lose 30 to 40% of their credits in the transition from 2-year institution to 4-year. So they're already struggling to succeed in passing many of the courses in their community colleges, and then they get the added demoralization of, once they get to the 4-year institution, finding out that a lot of the credits don't apply.
We only have a couple minutes before we go to the audience. So let me ask something that has been discussed quite a bit this year: tuition-free public college and university. Would that make things better, significantly better? Would it make it worse? How would it affect completion? It certainly would increase access at the front end, but would it increase completion at the back end, in your view?
I only support tuition-free college if it's targeted to the neediest students. I think there are lots of students out there who can pay, and they should pay, but if we're talking about making sure that low-income, moderate-income students are able to benefit from tuition-free college, then I'm all for it. But I suspect that if we don't target them in that intervention, they won't benefit at all, which will get us nowhere in as terms of what we're talking about in today's conversation.
Dr. Frederick?
Yeah, our higher education system in this country is the best only because it has been competitive, and you've had free market attempts to go out and do research and do the kinds of innovative things. And I'm concerned that if you do that, one, you set the bar lower for the lower socioeconomic students, and you say to them, you know, go to community college rather than go to a 4-year. Not that going to community college is the wrong thing, but I think you automatically put a choice in there. And the second part, you know, to piggyback on what was said, I do think that there is an opportunity for those who can pay. We'd have to make it more reasonable and to work that system better.
Yeah, I'll just mention that we run all kinds of data at Georgia State, and we find most of our students are low-income students, that the students do better if they have some skin in the game. So it doesn't have to be a lot. You know, there's a sweet spot there, but putting 5 to 10% of your own dollars into the education actually increases the graduation rates.
Do you think tuition-free public college and university, would that make sense?
It would. It would make sense, but it also would raise the question, what happens to all of the other people who have student loans standing right now? Are they going to do something for us?
Yeah. By the way, do you worry at all that if it was tuition free, that you would have a surge in applicants for public universities that would ultimately squeeze out some of the lower income students?
I do. I
do?
definitely think that would happen.
Yeah.
We already see capacity issues at the community colleges already, with more and more high and middle income students feeling that they're going there to start their education and then going to transfer later to a more prestigious institution. We already see that, so we know that this will happen.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, the students we have the most difficulty getting through the program are not the students who have the weakest academic background. That can be, you can help those students. It's the students who aren't motivated. So if you just open it up and say it's free to everybody, I do wonder if you're going to let a lot of students in who are really not ready to take this on seriously.
All right, I think we have questions. Do we have questions? I can't.
Over here.
Okay, over there. Yes.
That's not. Oh, can I hold it? Hi, I'm Joseph. I work with Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I'm a legal assistant there. And I guess I have, I don't know if this is allowed, but I have a little bit more of a statement than a question, but I think it could.
As long as it's fast.
I'll try to do a quick
Well,
elevator.
it's going to be fast.
Yeah. I showed up kind of late, but I heard y'all talking about resources at a university and losing credits as you transfer from a community college to a university. And I just wanted to share my experience with that to kind of add on to the conversation a little bit. And, you know, I'm a former high school dropout. I took 6 years to graduate high school, and I graduated second to last in my class. I washed dishes for a year, and then I went to a community college in San Antonio, transferred to UT Austin, did well, and I'll be starting Harvard Law School this fall. Thank you. And I just wanted to say that I felt alone and intimidated when I got to UT. I was not ready. I don't think I had the knowledge of even the most mediocre student on that campus at the time. But I found resources. There's a program called the Longhorn, or office called the Longhorn Center for Academic Excellence, and they introduced me to student organizations and tutoring when I needed it, and all kinds of things, and it made the world of difference for me. And my community college did much the same. They had a program that made sure, they knew I wanted to transfer to UT Austin, and they had a program that made sure that I was taking all the courses that wouldn't make me like lose my credits whenever I got there. And I just wanted to share that, and maybe y'all can elaborate on it.
When you said there were resources, were those provided by UT itself, that they in fact had an effort to help you, get your footing?
It's the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, and I think it's targeted obviously for, people from like low income or non-traditional backgrounds and stuff, and they just have all kinds of resources for us. And I just kind of happened into the office one day, and they just happened to have all these amazing things, and I kind of lived in there the majority of the time I was at UT.
Michelle, is that typical or unusual? To have
I
that
think
kind of support?
institutions are definitely trying to do things that cater to their students, but certainly campus culture is a big issue, and making sure that students actually feel welcomed on these institutions is certainly, we've seen talked about in the news quite a bit. And so that is an important part of student success that we need to keep our eyes on.
What's your transition like? How much outreach has there been from the school that you're heading into?
A lot. My advisor is actually sitting right
There
there.
you go. That's definitely a lot of outreach.
Okay? She's supporting me. She comes to all of the meetings that I go. She's like my family. So that kind of support that you get from the community college, that there's somebody, I know you all are teachers, but that little that you give us, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I know it was Teachers Week appreciation, so we really appreciate all the effort that you guys put out for us.
Do we have another question? All right, well, I don't think so. I have a final question, which is Bill Fry, who is one of our most prominent demographers, has calculated that given the increasing share of the total post-secondary student body that are kids of color, that if you don't improve the completion rates for that growing number of non-white college students, that the share of all adults, all working-age adults with a college degree will begin to go down for the first time, possibly ever, around 2020, that there will be fewer Americans of working age with a share with a college degree than there were, say, in 2000 or 2010. I'm just wondering, do you feel, looking at that prospect, that there is a sufficient sense of urgency on the question of improving these completion rates? We've improved access, no question about it, but completion is still lagging. Michelle, maybe start us off.
Sure, I definitely think that there's a sense of urgency, and we need to recognize that as we talk about closing the completion gap, we talk about these issues of equity, that they are tightly linked to national global competitiveness as well as social equity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there has been appropriate urgency. There are 105 HBCUs. We account for 3% of the minority population in terms of higher ed, and we are responsible for 21% of all of the bachelor's degrees awarded in this country to African American students. We're responsible for 34% of all of the African Americans who get STEM bachelor's degrees. That has been an ongoing since Brown versus the Board of Education, and yet still, I don't think there has been an urgency to support those institutions like we should. And if we don't, although we represent a small portion, what we're doing in terms of outcome is unsustainable.
In Georgia.
Yeah, there's efforts that we haven't seen before, but what we really need is the transformation of higher education. We're members of something called the University Innovation Alliance. These are big 11 big public universities, including University of Texas, that are doing interesting things in this space, and we've got together in collaborative space to try to learn from each other and accelerate the pace of change. But the reality is, at most four-year, two-year institutions, they're still doing things the way they were 20 and 30 years ago.
Cecily, you get the final word on what it took to get to this point, and what do you think it will take to get more of your fellow students to the point that you're at today?
I think what it would take is diversity, a lot of their diversity and access from the counselors to the students, information that is available not only on Twitter, not only on the Facebook, but actually at the campuses, welcoming the students, giving them as much information as you can, and questioning, is this the right path that you're taking? Is this really what you want to do?
This has been a terrific panel. I hope you will visit the Next America site can be found on theatlantic.com, where we cover these issues every day. And join me in thanking this terrific panel.